I'd like to briefly chat about intertextuality in Slaughterhouse 5. As you hopefully remember, intertextuality is the way books, for example, influence other books or are influenced by other books. It's not just books, it can be any kind of text, film, anything really. And the novel Slaughterhouse 5 is highly intertextual. By that, of course, I mean it's influenced books that have come after it, and films and all kinds of texts that came after Slaughterhouse 5. But today, or this evening, I'm going to focus on how this novel shows influence of other texts within it. It shows evidence, clear evidence that it's been influenced by other texts and incorporates other texts inside the novel itself. There are countless examples in the novel, and I'm not going to go through all of them. It could be anything from references to Jesus in the story from the Bible of Jesus Christ, and which that intertextual reference is often played around with to emphasize how unfair life really is. It could be a little text like the prayer that people at Alcoholics Anonymous pray. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the wisdom the courage to change the things I cannot accept, and the wisdom to tell the difference. I'm not sure if I have that right, which might be a good thing, perhaps. The Alcoholics Anonymous prayer is a recurring motif in this novel, and so that's an example of a text from outside the novel that's been placed within it. And I'll let you maybe think about what that means and how you could perhaps write about that in your exam. But today I'd like to draw your attention to a series of 3, I think, might be 4 intertextual references between page 237 of our edition of the novel and 240. The context here is that Billy Pilgrim is in hospital after his plane crash, the plane crash he survived, and he's in hospital alongside a writer named Bertram Copeland Rumford, and Rumford is writing some book about the history of World War II, and he has several resources there that are referred to. The Rumford is a fictional character, but the resources Rumford is using in this novel, as far as I can tell, are genuine texts from earlier times. Not that much earlier. The first one is part of the transcript of the speech by US President Harry Truman announcing the bombing of Hiroshima. And a large chunk of that speech is put in here. And in the speech, it's largely a sort of a declaration of how America has come to this point where they can obliterate cities on the ground. So you can see how this is going to tie in with themes in the novel and showing how destructive war can be. This is immediately followed by another reference to a novel, sorry, not a novel, a history book called The Destruction of Dresden by a historian named David Irving. David Irving is a real, famous, infamous, controversial historian, and he wrote a book about Dresden, which is referred to here. And the interesting thing is there are two sort of two forwards or introductions by two soldiers two real life generals. One's a general, one's an air marshal. The general is Iracy Ika, and there's a little passage here from the foreword to David Irving's book, which basically justifies the bombing of Dresden and says that it was absolutely justifiable and had to be done. And then there's an extract from the foreword or introduction from Air Marshal Saundby. And Air Marshal Saundby was really the Air Marshal who was responsible for planning the bombing of Dresden. But in his foreword, he claimed the bombing of Dresden, as far as I understand this, the bombing of Dresden was unnecessary. He was one of the people who planned it. He wasn't taking blame for it. He was saying he was following orders that came from higher up by people who were mistaken. It's a somewhat nuanced and complex argument he's making, which also, in Saundby's argument, justifies the nuclear deterrent, that is, keeping up a nuclear program of nuclear weapons, which he thinks will be a better way of preventing horrible bombings like Dresden. It's a rather, out of context, it's rather hard to understand, but the main point you can see is that some texts like Harry Truman's speech and the foreword by Iracy Ika justify bombing and indiscriminate killing and the wiping out of cities, and the others actually challenge the certainty of whether it was justified or needed at all. So I encourage you to, if you're thinking that you might want to write about how this novel shows evidence of being shaped by other texts, that you should read perhaps from about pages 236 to 238. Sorry, 240.